The Sacramento Kings have been under a lot of pressure on past draft nights, especially with perpetually being in the lottery and looking for a player to turn their franchise around. Well, now that they're in the 24th spot, there's significantly less pressure. Is now the time for a big swing, even if it's for a younger player that might not crack the Kings rotation for a couple of years? Here to answer that question, plus discuss the Kings potentially trading the pick and more about this 2023 NBA draft, Bryant West from the Kings Herald joins me right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer for ABC 10 News. And if you're not familiar with the Kings Herald, first off, what's wrong with you? The Kings Herald, formerly known as Sacktown Royalty, has been a group that has been putting out excellent Kings content all year long for a long time, much longer than I've been hosting the Locked On Kings podcast. And when it comes to draft time, Bryant West is their expert. He always hits the draft hard. He very clearly follows the Sacramento Kings, so understands what the Sacramento Kings are looking for. The position that they're in, who Monty McNair tends to favor, or just based off of Monty's patterns over the past handful of drafts, the 3 drafts that he's done now with the Sacramento Kings, where he kind of leans or where he kind of goes. And he factors that all into his general assessment of this 2023 draft class, the same way that you would get a general assessment from all the other major mock drafters and draft boards and things out there and resources out there to help prepare you for the draft. Bryant is amazing, and you can tell how good he is because everybody in the Sacramento Kings podcasting scene this week has had him on their shows, from Deuce and Mo to Kings Pulse, now here to Locked On Kings. So I really think you're going to enjoy this conversation with Bryant. We want to know not just who you are favoring for the Kings with the 24th pick, or who you would like to see the Kings pick at pick number 24, but also what you think about the possibility of trading the pick. I've shared before, I don't think the Kings are trading this pick more for financial reasons and for long-term cap space reasons than for like talent that they could possibly get for the 24th pick. I could be wrong on that. That's just my gut feeling on the situation. Brian and I are going to discuss the possibility of the Kings not just trading the pick, but also potentially trading up in this draft. How do you feel about trading the pick? Would you move the pick? Who would you try and target in a trade if you were moving the pick? Feel free to share that with us at any time at Matt George Sack on Twitter. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. But for now, enjoy the wisdom of draft analyst for the Kings Herald, Bryant West. Normally this time of the year, we're searching through these draft classes and trying to find the guy to help save this franchise or turn this franchise around. And there's debate, there's arguments, there's far attaching ourselves too much emotionally to a player like I did with Keegan Murray last year. Like we do it every single year. We're used to doing it. But here the Sacramento Kings are in a position where the draft is still important. They might trade the pick, they might select a player, and they're trying to improve. But ultimately, it doesn't nearly matter as much as in years past when they've always been a perpetual lottery team. It's an interesting position to be in. Maybe not the best for content, but certainly a more comfortable position for Kings fans. And I'm very comfortable having Bryant West from Kings Herald on. He is their draft guru, one of the best draft analysts, I think, in the Sacramento area when it comes to understanding what the Sacramento Kings need, but also trying to find players that either fit correctly or just the best talent that the Kings could develop. Bryant, you've been popular this week with Deuce and Mo on Kings Pulse. Locked On Kings kind of stole you here at the end of the week, so I appreciate you coming back on, my friend.
Hey, of course, it's that time of year. And like you said, this is a totally different year than any other pretty much season that I've paid attention to the draft. It's a breath of fresh air, honestly, not to be looking at guys in the top 10 trying to figure out who's going to turn this team around. But at the same time, being a fan of a good team, and man, is it nice to say that, being a fan of a good team later in the draft, it means lower emotional stakes for draft fans, but it also means the trust in the front office folks who are doing their homework. Because everybody that we could talk about today, maybe all over the board for every NBA team, Monty McNair very much included.
It's going to be interesting to see what route Monty and the Kings go. If I were to, based off of our understanding of who Monty is, I think he'll just try and take someone that he feels will help improve the Sacramento Kings. But I mean, the strategy for the 24th pick is vastly different from a lottery pick, a top 5 pick, a top 10 pick. In your mind, like, do you lean more towards the strategy of try and swing for the fences and get one of those diamond in the rough type players that 5 years from now, when they're doing redrafts, are in the lottery and everyone's going, how did they pass on that guy? Or is it better for the Kings, you think, just to try and find maybe a safer pick that contributes, or in theory makes a lot more sense for where the Kings are at right now?
Well, it's weird to say this, but I'm fairly comfortable with the Kings' depth at this point. Not that they can't absolutely use more players, but at the same time, I've always been a guy who wants to swing for the fences. That was the same back when they were a lottery team, and it's certainly going to be the same now. If I had my choice between, a guy I know could come in and give you 20 minutes off the bench pretty early, or a guy who's probably going to spend time in Stockton, but I have a strong guess would be a better player in 2-3 years, I'm going to favor that home run swing. But at the same time, it's especially over this last year, it's just a good reminder that we can never, ever say that a player isn't going to improve, or predictions on who's going to be a better player at the end of the season, at the end of 2 seasons. It's just so impossible ever to make those bets with any sort of sense of surety. So whichever avenue Monty McNair goes, the only thing I'm sure of is pretty much only sure of 2 things. One, he's going to pick somebody who is a high instinct player who understands the game of basketball and is developing in some way or another. And the other thing I'm sure of is that every time I've tried to predict what Monty McNair would do on draft day, I've been dead wrong. So I've given up trying to guess.
I think that's what makes Monty McNair a good GM, is he's not predictable in a lot of ways. Someone presented this perspective to me, and I was really interested about it because I never really thought about it this way. But even though the Kings are in a position where it would be better for them, in theory, to find a player that can help them win right now, compared to years past, compared to this playoff drought that the Kings have been in and finally ended, are the Kings in a better position now to take a young project player, stash him in the G League, now that they have an established coaching staff, an established culture, an established system where a player can come in and truly take the time they need to develop and not just be thrown into the fire as an 18 or 19-year-old kid and expected to save the franchise? Is now the right time, you think, for the Kings to go after a player like that?
Yeah, absolutely. The foundation of this franchise is set. The coaching staff is set. It ain't going anywhere. And it looks like a really smart organization top to bottom. If now's not the time that you wouldn't feel comfortable taking those swings, probably sticking a guy in Stockton for a year or two, helping him bring along a 19-year-old who you think could, like you said, be one of those lottery guys in a redraft, I don't know when it is. And that's not to say that at the same time, the Kings could bring in anybody. If you told me right now, the guy they bring in could play 20 minutes a game next year across the board, are we going to be really upset at any position? Are we going to be upset with more guard depth? Are we going to be upset with more wing or forward depth? Are we going to be upset if they try to bring in another big guy? No, this team could use more talent at pretty much any position. But like you said, if now is not the time you feel comfortable bringing in a more upside project player, I really don't know when it would be.
Speaking of the predictability of Monty McNair or lack thereof, like it's my gut feeling at this point, and I mean, I don't know if that means anything. It's my gut feeling that the Kings are going to make a draft selection with this pick. Like, I don't see them trading this pick, and that's more for contract reasons and financial reasons than it is for like players at that range reasons. Although I do think there are going to be players at that range that could help the Sacramento Kings immediately or be a good long-term project for them. Mm-hmm. But am I alone in that? Like, do you feel like this is the Kings are going to end up making a selection on draft night? Or do you think this pick has decent trade value despite being late first round and the Kings are going to and should explore kind of moving on from it to get more NBA established ready talent?
Well, for one, I just hope that Monty McNair does his homework in every avenue, and I'm sure he will. But like you said, smart playoff teams love getting young players to work up in their system. That's how you build a long-term functioning team. And like you said, getting a player in the 20s means an inexpensive contract with team control for 4 to 7 years. It means you're hopefully getting a good depth piece for a long time. I've come to the conclusion that it's just so much harder to predict what teams would or would not want to do as you get later in the draft. But as you look at this class, it's a fairly deep draft, especially once you get outside the lottery. Just pull up any big board from a draft expert. You can go from like the end of the lottery to 35, 40, and you could realistically make a strong case for most of those guys for the Kings at 24. So this is a good class. Now, does the 24th pick hold a ton of trade value? I don't know. It's going to be in the eye of the beholder for every GM that Monty talks to. But at the same time, I also sit here thinking, if the Kings are going to make a real trade this summer, not kind of tinker around the edges, it's hard for me to pinpoint what assets would be available that absolutely for sure would be more valuable to a GM than here's a pick you can use right now to get a young guy into your system. So it's kind of a catch-22. I would think it's just a coin flip depending on if Monty finds a trade that he likes come draft day. But I'm going to enjoy having a rookie on this team who's not Sasha. I'm going to enjoy having a young guy bring along. I want to see a project player grow in this team. So I love seeing, Kessler Edwards. That was a great pick last year up because I want to see long-term upside guys develop in the system. Now that we know we have the coaching system and the infrastructure in place to bring those guys along, bring them along with a coach who knows what he wants out of these guys.
This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make a fast break over to FanDuel right now for the NBA Finals because new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. It's an insurance policy. Either let's say you go deposit $100. Let's say you put all $100 down on the Miami Heat to cover the spread in game 2. Don't know what that spread is yet, but let's say it's the same as game 1, -9.5. And let's say you take the Heat, you put $100 down and you lose. Well, instead of now you're down $100 and you log off the site and never play again out of frustration and anger and say, I'm never doing that again. I just burnt money. FanDuel wants you to keep playing. So they're going to give you, again, up to $2,500 back in bonus bets for you to recuperate that money, continue playing, and eventually make more money on top of that. Or you win that bet and suddenly you're in the green already. That's one of the many great things about FanDuel. There's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. You understand this draft class significantly better than I do. So you're going to be able to provide, I think, better perspective on this than I can. But tell me if I'm wrong here. Like one of these scenarios that I've kind of ruled out for the Kings, I shouldn't rule out anything, but I feel like this is the least likely scenario, is the Kings moving up in the draft for any reason. Is there realistically, like, do you think there's enough talent on or in this draft that maybe is going in that 20s range or even late teens range where you think it's enticing enough, or that player could potentially be enticing enough for Monty to want to actually move up?
There are a couple of guys in this draft class who would interest me significantly enough that as I stare at these mock boards and drafts and think, I don't think that Leonard Miller is going to fall to 24, but oh my goodness, would it be great to see him in a Sacramento uniform. So if I was Monty, I would at least make some calls to teams that I thought would have interest in trading back. But at the same time, the Kings asset pool is either way too good or not good enough to make a real swing up. Like, who are they adding to 24 to get up to the lottery? Is it another future first? You probably don't want to do that because then you're really handicapping your ability to make future trades. Is it one of the key players on this roster? No, you don't want to add that to 24. So I don't expect they trade up, but at the same time, Leonard Miller from the G League, he's a guy I'd love to see them sneak up and get. Chris Murray, I know everybody is a big fan of him. I don't think he falls to 24. If this front office really wants to pair the Twins, I think they may have to trade up. You could sell yourself Derek Lively. I know you're a big fan of his. I don't think he probably falls to 24 after this huge combine upswing that he's had. If it's one of those guys and Monty makes a trade to, move up 4-5 spots, maybe the assets make sense. But at the same time, I agree with you. I don't think it's likely.
With Chris Murray specifically, like what I've been trying to unpack is it worth it? And maybe worth is not the right term. Does it make sense to essentially, and this is kind of a brutal way of putting it, but add a worse version of a player you already have to your roster? Now, depth at the wing, like that 3-4 spot that Keegan and Chris kind of sit in, I think that's always a good thing for the Sacramento Kings. Yeah. Chris Murray is not as good as Keegan. That's pretty obvious, but Chris does some things that Keegan also does well. You can see like the length defensively, the spacing the floor, the 3-point shooting that in theory fit with the Kings. My question is, do you think it's better if Chris Murray is there, do you think it's better for the Kings to take that knowing who Keegan is and knowing how valuable that depth is, or to try and target a player that maybe has a higher upside, is younger, who could potentially be more helpful in an area like rim protection or rebounding or creating their own shot?
Yeah. Like you said, I think at the end of the day, Chris is good enough at so many different things as a 6'9" combo forward who's solid to good at defending, driving, rebounding, shooting. No team should want to avoid that kind of player late in the first. And at the same time, as much as we can look at all of these guys and sell ourselves on them in this range, the goal in the late first should always just be to make sure that you get an NBA player. Mm-hmm. And the hit range as you get later and later into the first is just so much smaller that I wouldn't worry too much about fit. I think to me, that's kind of how draft mistakes are made. If you're looking at your big board and you say, hey, Chris Murray's here at 24, but so is player X, and we think that he's in the same tier as talent, but he fits our roster a little bit better, yeah, then you have a case. But if you're looking at, well, we think Chris Murray may be the best talent left, but we don't need him because we already have Keegan, Trey Lyles is hopefully coming back. Let's go down our board until we find somebody who fits our biggest needs. I think that's where draft mistakes can be made.
That being said, Brian, at this range, I feel like the Kings are in a good spot, though, to kind of check both boxes, because they could probably find the best talent available, or what they believe to be the best talent available at that spot, that still fits a need for this team, because there seem to be a lot of 3s and 4s really around this range in the draft. So is it kind of a best of both worlds situation we're potentially looking at for Monty and the Kings?
It certainly could be. There's a whole bunch of 3s on this board that I really like. Quite a few 4s I'm sure we'll talk about, where if those are the guys who Monty McNair thinks are both the best talent, hey, best of both worlds, like you said, because this team definitely does need more varied talent. And if you can convince yourself, hey, this guy is the best prospect, hey, go for it. My only concern would be there's not a lot of centers in this class, and the rim protection, especially once you get outside of Lively, the only true interesting prospect to me who's in that Kings range is Noah Clowney. And he may be off the board by then, or Monty McNair might look at him and be like, that's a level of project player I'm not comfortable with. So if you're looking for rim protection in this draft class, I do think at that point, you're probably going way too far down your board, and you should reevaluate the talent versus fit argument.
Well, congratulations, Bryant. I'm promoting you to lead draft advisor of Monty McNair in the Sacramento Kings front office. Who are you whispering as of right now in the ear of Monty, of like the guys that have really caught the attention? I mean, you mentioned Leonard Miller, but guys that have really caught your attention respectively in that range. And again, that range could be wide open. I've seen guys that are in the teens that are suddenly in the second round. Like, it's just fluctuating every single day, it seems like. But who has caught your attention in that Kings range, that whether you think they're great for the Sacramento Kings or you just think, man, I really like this prospect for any team?
I'm falling in love with Sidi Sisku, 19-year-old Frenchman who played for the G League Ignite program last year. 6'6" in shoes, 223 pounds, plays physical, locked in on defense as any guy you'll see from a young prospect. Absolutely bullied some G League guys. He dictates physicality on both ends of the court, and that's something the Kings absolutely need more of. 11.6 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, a block. His big question mark is his shooting. He can get to the cup, probably needs to do it more, but he's just shot 31.4% from 3 last year. Needs to continue to improve his shooting. I don't remember where I saw this, but I think I saw that he didn't shoot great at the combine. So it's still a question mark moving forward. But in terms of his size, his defensive ability, his promise at switching across different defensive assignments, those are kind of the guys I always fall in love with, those versatile wing defenders who have enough offensive upside. And to me, he's that kind of prospect I'd love to see them get, because maybe he doesn't crack the rotation next year, but more time in the G League, playing time in Stockton, I think he could be one of those guys who we look back in this draft class and they're like, why did he last in the 20s?
And he seems to be one of those guys that just has a massive range. Like I feel like teams can talk themselves just outside of the lottery, or maybe in the very end of the lottery going, hey, let's take this flyer. And there are going to be other teams that are like, no, I think he's going to be there at 30 for us. So we don't have to make a move. We can wait. Like realistically, when it comes to this range, do you think about that at all? Like, do you think about or worry about attaching it? Like, it seems like at this range more than in the lottery, you're going to have 20, 30, maybe 40 guys come into your practice facility to get a look at them. Because even if you fall in love with one guy, that guy could be there, that guy could be gone, and you can't really forecast that.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's one thing I want to just keep stressing to Kings fans, it's a lot different than when we were sitting in the lottery and we could realistically pick 10 guys and be like, okay, one of these 10 guys is almost certainly going to be a King at the end of the day. The variance between what my big board's going to look like, what draft experts' big boards are going to look like, and what every single NBA team's big boards are going to look like is just going to be massive once you get outside the lottery, and especially in the 20s. And you know, there are definitely going to be some guys who, if you just look at big boards, you just look at Tankathon, you just look at how Sam Vecini mocked it, you're like, why is Trace Jackson Davis in the conversation for 24? I keep seeing him at like 38 or something. Why didn't they just wait? And I just got to keep stressing, you got to trust the people who are doing their homework here, because our understanding of it, the draft experts' understanding of it, and the team's understanding of these guys is just going to be so massive once we get outside the lottery.
When analyzing, especially lottery talent, which we've been used to, a lot of people say, hey, you have to give them 4 or 5 years to truly understand who they are. Is it the same, you think, for players in this range? Do they need more time? Do they maybe need less time because they're looked at more as potentially just role players than they are starters and sensational world-changing talent like you look in the top 5?
Yeah, especially since, like you said, there's a difference between Keegan Murray coming in at number 4, and the assumption was the whole time that he was going to start. And I mean, he did. He started 87 games, I think. Versus a guy, anybody who they pick at 24 isn't going to come in assuming, all right, I'm going to come in and be a starter week 1. So the roles are going to be different. But at the same time, we can also, for the first time in a while, look at this and think, we've got a franchise that's going to have plans, that's going to have more established ideas of how they're going to bring these guys along. And they don't have to do it immediately. They don't have to start relying on a 21-year-old to immediately come in and help them get to the playoffs. The depth is always going to need to get better, but you can be more patient. You can use Stockton. It's really a truly wonderful thing to be talking about the Sacramento Kings as a team that has the foundations in place to have a 3-4 year plan with young guys.
With Trace Jackson Davis, he started to pick up a little bit of steam here. And I did a podcast episode recently with Bobby Gerald, and we talked a little bit about Trace Jackson Davis. And my comment section was just raving about him. Like, man, this could be a really, really good pickup for the Kings at 24. Like you mentioned, there's guys like Sam Vecini that think he's going to be a second round talent. I'm looking at a mock draft right now that has him pick 31. So at the very, very beginning of the second round. Kings had him in for a pre-draft workout. Just what's your opinion and your feel on him? Some are saying he's a wing. Some are saying he's mainly a 4. And then Bobby Gerald told me he thinks he's just a small 5 in the NBA. That's what he's going to be. Like, what do you think about this kind of tweener type player?
I agree with Bobby there. I think ideally what he's going to be is a small ball 5. And he's been a guy I've been high on for a while. If he's the pick at 24, hey, I'm going to understand it and I'm going to be excited for it. Led the Hoosiers in scoring, rebounding, shot blocking, and assists. Like, he was one of the better players in college basketball over the last few years, but he took it to a totally different level this year. The big question is how he's going to adjust his offensive game plan at the next level, because in college he was the ideal post up, control the paint guy. If I remember correctly, something like 37% of all of his shots were in post ups. And he was great around the rim. He's got good touch, but that's not going to be his role at the next level. The good news is that he's very quick, mobile, explosive for his size, and he's going to need to rely on that a lot more, pick and roll, rim running, figure out how to get defenses to pay attention to him in order to unlock his playmaking instincts. But the reason that I think so many Kings fans, myself very much included, are excited about him is because of those playmaking instincts. And we saw the Kings really struggle last year to have a big come off the bench behind Sabonis who could keep the offense going in any way, shape, or form. And Trace Jackson Davis is a great playmaker for his size. The question and the big reason why I hesitate to say, oh yeah, he's worth the 24th pick, is that he's just not a shooter. I know he shot the ball well enough at the combine. I'm just not going to believe that until he shows it in a real game. He was 0 from 3 from distance across his whole Indiana career. And I think he was 3 of 16 from mid-range this year. And it's not like this Kings team should be overly willing to add another non-shooter to this roster. So I'm excited for him. I'm really glad they brought him in, because he's definitely one of the prospects I'm most interested in. I'm going to have a profile out on him probably early next week. He seems to fit a lot of the boxes that Monty McNair goes for. High instinct guy, versatile, and hey, rim protection and playmaking off the bench. You've
established pretty clearly that you prioritize like swing and best talent available over fit, which makes complete sense. This question does have to do with fit, because the Kings offense was so significant and stood out so much and really became the foundation of what the Kings did so well this season and captured the attention of the rest of the league. Doesn't necessarily mean the Kings will go out and pick this talent. But when you look at this class, are there any guys that you like, yeah, I can copy and paste them into this Kings offense and know that they should work? They won't, there's no guarantee that they will, but based off the archetype of player that they are, you should be able to drop them right into what the Kings do system-wise if they played, and they would work perfectly or should fit perfectly. Are there guys that kind of ring that bell for you?
Absolutely, especially on the shooting end, because as you're kind of constructing the roster around De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis, the goal should always be to have as much shooting as possible. And one guy I wrote a profile on was Dariq Whitehead from Duke. And quite a few people were like, well, why would we take another, he's 6'6", so it's not like he's an undersized wing, but people are like, well, why would we take another shooting guard? And at the same time, I'm like, because the Kings always should be happy to add more shooting. And if they think Whitehead is the best talent there, it's not like we're positive that every shooter that the Kings currently have is going to be on here when the Kings reach their peak as a team. And a fantastic shooter, shot 42% from 3 this season, and hit it off the bounce really well. I think you could plug him in as a floor spacer, run around, run off the screens, catch and shoot guy. I think he'll immediately be great at that role as the rest of his game develops, because we are talking about a 19-year-old. We're talking about a 19-year-old who suffered a foot injury last August that kind of really did hamper a lot of his Duke career. But a year ago he was talking about as a lottery prospect, and now he's in the 20s because that foot injury never healed. He had to have surgery again in, I think it was early May. So now we're kind of looking at this guy like, well, he's an incredible shooter. Does the rest of his game come back after this second surgery? And that's a real question mark that, smarter medical people are going to have to answer than I do. But to me, the Kings fans should never hesitate on seeing Sacramento add another shooter, because like you said, this offense is only going to be as good as the players that are on this team. And to keep it good, add more shooting.
Couple more for you, Bryant. We're a little scarred when we think back to the Thomas Robinson draft, in the sense that T-Rob fell to the Kings, and the Kings made that selection because they felt like he fell to us. We absolutely have to take him. That really burned them that year.
Oh,
but
God, I loved him too.
Yikes. I think we were all kind of excited about it. Yeah, very, very right. I mean, we could go through the amount of players. I mean, I loved the Jimmer Fredette pick, and I still have a Jimmer Fredette jersey in my closet that gives me nightmares looking at it. But like, is there a guy within reason that if he falls to 24, you're like, doesn't matter who else was on your board, like you have to take him for upside alone? Like, is there somebody there that like realistically could fall to 24? It's very unlikely, but it could happen. And the Kings are like, done deal, submit him. We don't even need the time on the clock. Yeah,
there's probably a couple of them. Derek Lively would absolutely be up there. If he's there at 24, he fits a lot of boxes as a center behind Sabonis. And maybe if the shooting he showed at the combine continues, somebody who could play next to him. Leonard Miller, we talked about him from the G League, 6'10" guy, one of the best rebounders in the G League, 19 years old, has some on-ball skills, fantastic defender. I would love to see him in the lineup moving forward. There's a couple of guys. If Cason Wallace, I keep seeing him in the late teens, and it just boggles my mind because he's the next Kentucky guard who everybody kind of undersells, and then they're like, whoa, where did this guy come from? Spaces the floor, great off the catch, fantastic defender. A combo guard isn't the Kings' biggest need, but he's a great defender and he can shoot off the catch, so fits a role both ways. It's really nice being at 24, because if a guy were to fall and the Kings could just pick another random name, Keontae George or Jalen Hood-Schifino, just pick your favorite guy in the teens. Suddenly they're at 24. Let's imagine that they are a Thomas Robinson in 3 years. Catching the falling knife isn't going to hurt anywhere near as much at 24 as it did at 5.
Mm-hmm. You got that right. The last thing I have for you has nothing to do with the draft, although I think the entire offseason revolves around one decision for the Kings. Everything is going to somehow branch and attach to the decision that the Kings make about Harrison Barnes. Wanted to get your input on it. What do you think, if you were to guess, or if you were to make a decision, bring Harrison Barnes back versus let him go and try to replace him or upgrade that position, which seems to be the most upgradable starting spot realistically as of right now? Where are you leaning on that? Because there's pros and cons, and significant pros and cons on both sides.
Yeah, it's definitely there's definitely clear significant cons, but at the same time, I agree with you. It's probably the spot this team needs to upgrade moving forward. I got to admit, the playoffs scarred me off of Harrison as much as anything. What he did last year, both as a player and in his leadership, and his shooting the dang ball from what was it, January to March, he was insanely hot. He really did help this team. At the same time, now is the time when you have to make that decision. Now is the time where the rubber to meet the road for Monty McNair. If the contracts that are offered to him make sense and you can keep trying to find a replacement for him in the starting lineup, maybe not next year, but moving forward, hey, I'm never going to be upset about having talented wings on this roster, especially one like Barnes, who means so much to this locker room. But at the same time, if I was Monty McNair, I would be out there. I would be calling quite a few guys trying to find that small forward, power forward to fit next to Keegan Murray, who's going to be on my roster for the next 5 years, instead of Harrison Barnes, where it's like, how far can this can get kicked down the road?
I'm going to sneak in one more. If Monty decided essentially to run this team back with the addition of a few, like maybe it's like Sasha Vezenkov and then who they take at 24 and then a cheap free agency signing or two that just fills out the roster essentially. But the main core of this team is back, including Barnes, including Trey Lyles and the rest of that Kings core. Are you more like, where are you on the spectrum? Are you more nervous of the Kings not being able to replicate or build upon this last season that they had? Or are you more confident in, with more time together, with theoretically the next step for Keegan Murray, maybe next step for Domas, next step for De'Aaron Fox, that this team can improve upon what they did last year? Where are you at on that spectrum?
Well, I have no doubt that this team will continue to improve. And I really don't have a worry about in terms of the regular season. Like, even if this team isn't third seed again, I think that I trust how this team plays in the regular season. They're going to make the playoffs, knock on wood. The question for me comes down to, we just had some big concerns exposed in the playoffs. And if your additions are Sasha Vezenkov and a rookie at 24, how's that improving the rebounding come playoff time? How is that going to improve the defense come playing time? That's the question I have. I have no concerns about this team being good in the regular season, but if the status quo is met, to me, the playoffs are the big concern.
Well, this offseason doesn't feel as vital as it has in the past, but certainly there are some big decisions to make, including what the Kings do on draft night. Bryant, before I let you go, you mentioned you have a Trace Jackson Davis profile coming up, but what kind of things are you doing and is Kings Herald doing in the build up to draft night?
Yeah, we're going to have quite a few profiles coming out. We've got a couple out now. Next week, I'll probably be putting out the Trace Jackson Davis one, like I talked. Colby Jones, City Siskiyou are also on my to-do list. And then we'll probably have a big board out by draft day. So plenty of content coming out.
Go and check that out. Bryant, thanks again in a busy week for making time here on Locked On Kings, my friend. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We'll see you on draft night.
Hey, I always appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Big thank you to Bryant for joining me here on the Locked On Kings podcast. Again, he's excellent. Again, if you're not familiar with the work that he does over at the Kings Herald, go and check it out and all of the buildup to the draft itself. And I would love to have Bryant back on after the draft is over to be able to discuss whatever the Sacramento Kings decide to do. Appreciate your support as always here of Locked On Kings. If you're new to the podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe if you can. Hit that notification bell as well so you can know every single day that the Sacramento Kings post, or rather Locked On Kings posts an episode. Our goal is to try and not get you through the off season, but our goal is to walk with you through it, right? I'm just as impatient as you are, maybe even more so. I want this offseason to get to the good parts, right? I want us to get to the draft. I want us to get to free agency. The California Classic is returning to Sacramento. Now, it's both good news and bad news for me. The good news is the California Classic's returning to Sacramento. And if you haven't had the opportunity to go to the California Classic and experience it, I highly encourage you to go. The bad news is that falls right during my family vacation this year. So unfortunately, I won't be able to go. I won't be able to potentially see Victor Wembanyama and Scoot in person. But it's still an amazing event. You should still go. I'll go more into details about what we're going to do for content during that week, or if I'm just going to be taking a break from content during that vacation that I, trust me, very sorely need. But we'll tackle that bridge when we come to it. I'm glad the California Classic is coming back to Sacramento. You should definitely look into getting tickets. I think tickets go on sale on like the 4th or something like that. So we're less than a month away from the draft, and we're just barely over a month away from when the California Classic is here. So it's good. We're going to have basketball in Sacramento sooner than we know, and then we're going to get to free agency, and that's when all the heat is really going to pick up and begin. So we'll get you through all of that here on the Locked On Kings podcast. I appreciate your support as always. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.